Hello, I'm Asghar Sharif and you're watching news from Kazakhstan. A $100 feast was held on Constitution Day in Astana. The unprecedented modest celebration began with the abolition of a military parade, which had been previously held 3 times. Last year, it involved 250 units of equipment and more than 3,000 troops. This time, young people took the initiative and used social networks, not having to spend a single penny on advertisements. They organized a large motocross, a few flash mobs, and gave out a cake to residents. More details on the festivities in the next story.
For 40 orphanage children in Astana, Constitution Day started in a museum. The guides at the Nazarbayev Center gave them an express lecture explaining what exactly is the main law of the country and when it was adopted. Children themselves were asking more up-to-date questions, such as what happened to the annual August parade. This year, the Defense Ministry decided not to showcase its military might because all the necessary equipment had been already shown to the world in May during the Arms Expo. Kids seemed to disagree with military officials. If they had a parade, Constitution Day would have been a memorable holiday. The holiday was also marked with a bike ride across the country. The symbolic start was given at the Constitution Street. The bikes are decorated with state symbols and bikers with happy smiles. After all, it is not every day that they are allowed to ride the main streets of Astana. Organizers tell reporters off camera that they did not have to pay for anything, since everything is done on a volunteer basis. They simply posted a call on the internet and people were happy to respond. Everyone came here with understanding of what to do and everyone helped. Even policemen told us we did a great job and it was a great celebration. Everything is so colorful. I wish I could see the ride myself, but I can feel that this put a smile on people's faces and raised their moods. The only expense was the cost of the cake, which came at about $135. The free treat, as always, disappeared in minutes. A slight mishap was of course unavoidable. The dancing flash mob of dozens of teenagers turned out to be celebrating Michael Jackson's birthday, who would have turned 54 the day before. However, a Jackson song smoothly transitioned into a Kazakh folk performance. The incident was quickly forgotten, and celebrations proceeded in accordance to the approved schedule.
National leader Nursultan Nazarbayev is counting on the benevolence of Western experts who criticize Kazakhstan for infringing and openly defying citizens' constitutional rights and freedoms. He blamed the nation's early years for certain undemocratic norms of the constitution and noted that in 20 years of independence, Kazakhstan has gone through what other nations have spent centuries on.
We understand that sometimes our Western friends and advisors criticize us for the failure to enforce some clauses of our constitution related to human rights, individual freedoms, and so on. I think while speaking about these issues, our critics and well-wishers have to keep in mind what Kazakhstan has managed to achieve in 20 years. We have reached so much in such a short time. If they'll take into account what has been achieved, I think that some leniency will be granted to Kazakhstan. The head of state made the statement at the international conference in Astana dedicated to Constitution Day. During the event, the president has once again reminded his fellow citizens that the state is not a cash cow. According to Nazarbayev, socially vulnerable people should not only ask but also give back to those who support their welfare, that is the working population. The nation's leader believed that social equality and employment for all are the parts of the recipe for success and elimination of dependency on the state. Returning to the topic of the conference, the head of state did not rule out further amendments to the Constitution. It seems that this was the president's reply to opponents who criticized the permanent status of changes of certain articles in the main document of the country. The most recent changes adopted by the parliament concerned the status and powers of the nation's leader. The Constitution is not a static document. In fact, it is alive and it is evolving. It might be subject to various changes. Since the world is rapidly changing, Kazakhstan must change along with the world. Therefore, our laws have to take into account all these new issues, and we will work to make it happen.
On the eve of the 17th anniversary of the adoption of Kazakhstan's constitution, experts debated its effectiveness. Does the fundamental law need amendments or maybe a return to the 1993 draft? Opinions in the next report.
The Constitution of 1995 was adopted on August 30th. On Friday, we are celebrating the signing of our Constitution, which was adopted by a decree of our President. A brief history lesson for just $30. That's the fee the reporter's crew had to pay to film a part of the exhibition. 2 stands in the Almaty's Central State Museum are dedicated to the Constitution, showing pictures from the early 90s and the document itself. Why can't it be shown to reporters for free, and what are the needs of the State Depository? Tour guide cannot answer these questions. According to the Constitution of 1995, Kazakhstan is a secular, democratic, unitary, and legal state. Local representatives emphasize that the document is fully consistent with the realities and needs of Kazakhstan citizens. According to the Constitution of Kazakhstan, the people of the country are the source of power, and every citizen is equal before the court and the law. In other words, all the rights and freedoms of the citizens are clearly outlined in our Constitution. Standard speeches receive applause. However, not everyone at the celebration totally agrees with what they hear. Legal expert Bulat Davletiarov says that nothing lasts forever, and all the changes within the authorities were immediately reflected in the Constitution. It is entirely possible that the document may undergo drastic changes once Nazarbayev is gone. It is necessary to change the leader from time to time, but nobody knows what might happen, thus everyone is concerned. Accordingly, I believe that this constitution will need to be changed as well. However, who is going to be in charge of it and what political forces would be responsible for that is a very tough question. During its 17 years, the Constitution has been supplemented and amended 3 times. The changes were never met with unequivocal approval. For instance, international observers are still appalled by the 2007 clause on the special status of the first president of Kazakhstan. 19 articles were amended in 1998, changing terms and privileges of the President, Senate, and Parliament members. The upper age limit for civil servants was dropped. In 2007, amendments made it impossible for one person to hold the post of the President for more than 2 consecutive terms, while the term itself was reduced to 5 years. The Constitution also acknowledged the special status of the first President of Kazakhstan, exempting Nursultan Nazarbayev from restrictions on terms of office. In 2011, the Parliament passed a new amendment, empowering the head of state to call for early presidential elections. All twists and turns with the Constitution were witnessed by one of the most respected politicians, Sirik Bolsun Abdildin. He explains that all changes happen at will of a single person in the country. Therefore, the Constitution does not need any additional supplements. Instead, it should be completely rewritten, with the 1993 version as a basis. The former head of the Supreme Council took an active part in its drafting. The first constitution of sovereign Kazakhstan was adopted on January 25, 1993, 25 years ago. Generally speaking, that constitution was accepted by everyone, yet only one individual did not like it and drew up the second constitution. Frankly, this constitution is made exclusively for one president only. 17 years later, experts say that the constitution did not become a solid asset for Kazakhstan's citizens. Most of them can't even say they know key articles by heart. So far, the anniversary on August 30th is not seen as a reason to celebrate the importance of the main document or assess the compliance with constitutional rights, but instead, just another day off.
Zhanaozen was not in the mood for celebrations. The central square, where officially 16 people were killed at last December's Independence Day riots, stood empty on Thursday. Nothing in this small oil town is reminiscent of a holiday, and the local population is not particularly consumed with the desire to celebrate Constitution Day after their close ones were first shot at, then, after what they say was an unfair trial, were convicted for rioting. The next report is about how August 30th was spent in Zhanaozen.
A celebration that never was, at least in Zhanaozen. Occasional banners at the main street and a couple dozen of multicolored flags, that is the only reminder that the country is celebrating Constitution Day. There is no music, no concerts, no folk groups that are always in surplus at any celebration in Kazakhstan. And even the squares, there are 2 of them here, in Tamak, where unarmed citizens were massacred last December, and Taoyel Sizdik. Both are unusually empty. What kind of a celebration can people talk about if the Constitution allegedly guaranteeing the rights and freedoms of citizens is written only for the selected few, wonder the residents of the rebellious town. Our city, where we have grown up and lived, now seems so strange and alienated. Aliya, the daughter of Rosa Tulitaeva, an activist of last year's strike movement who was charged with instigating social hatred, says that while her mother is in prison, there will be no celebration on her street. Aliya says the rights of citizens guaranteed by the Constitution of Kazakhstan are not upheld at all. The fact that her mother and other strikers are now behind bars is the direct evidence of that. How can we talk about human rights when my personal experience shows that everything written in the main document of the country has been completely negated? Who is going to protect us if both police and national security agents are spying on me? I am also a citizen of this country. What have we done? We are the children of an ordinary worker. Our mother is also an ordinary laborer, and her parents were simple workers. She has never had enemies. She was just protecting her rights and rights of others who are just like her, simple people. And now we have to suffer for this. For me, this square is like a black strip. I always try to go around it until my heart finds peace. Find those who opened fire at my son, says Torihan Turgenbaev, another resident of the distressed Zhanaozen. He lost his only child on December 16 last year. The father, who has been grieving over his son's untimely death for 8 months, appeals to the authorities again and again with the same question, but there's still no answer. They say today is the day of the law. They say that Independence Square is the place where our son's blood was shed. It has been 8 months that I haven't been there, and I will never go to that square. It should be called Red Bloody Square. It took someone's only child, someone's wife. There are many people who were wounded there. Someone who doesn't know what happened still walks across the square, while others with the knowledge cannot visit it anymore. Dusan Nurov, a longtime oil worker and participant of the 7-month strike that ended in a tragedy, returned from the Russian city of Kurgan on the eve of Constitution Day. In Russia, he underwent his 6th surgery. Dusan's fractured leg bone is the result of the police opening fire at the people on the square. For the demands to increase salaries and improve labor conditions guaranteed by the Constitution, he became disabled in his own country. After what he lived through, Dusan says that the local laws have absolutely no value for him. We went through so much humiliation while in the hospital between life and death. They grabbed us, took our fingerprints. People who survived surgeries were labeled criminals. There were interrogations right in the hospital when we were near death. We were not left in peace even during the night. To tell you the truth, I had major blood loss. They had to give me a blood transfusion for 2 days, and then I was sent to Astana for leg surgery, where I spent 3 months. In the meantime, my house was searched. Zhanaozen is much like a doctor's test, an indicator that allows everyone to see to what extent society has become ill. These 3 stories, 3 tragedies from the same event, are an obvious proof of how poor the state of human rights is in the country where they are guaranteed by the main document. Meanwhile, the oil-rich Zhanaozen is still beyond the reach of the law. Instead, it is in a very tight embrace of the people in fatigues, marching so bravely across the bloody square.
Official Berlin is demanding Accorda to release leaders of opposition from jail. Leader of Bundestag's left faction, Dagmar Enkelman, addressed a letter to the Kazakh government calling for an end to political prosecution of Vladimir Kozlov, Serik Sapargali and Akjanat Aminov. She believes their arrest and detention are inconsistent with democratic principles.
Ich habe Informationsmaterial zum Beispiel, das ist mir alles mitgebracht worden, das habe ich bekommen.
We've collected information about the case of Vladimir Kozlov and sent a letter, similar to the one we wrote concerning Bulat Atabayev to the embassy of Kazakhstan. A little later I met with the ambassador, and now I can say with certainty that we have reached a consensus that not many legal steps were taken in his case.
Und da werde ich ganz sicher auch deutlich sagen, dass ich der Auffassung bin, dass das mit Rechtsstaat nichts zu tun hat.
Well-known human rights activist Vadim Kuramshin, released earlier this week, commented on the trial over opposition leaders for instigating social hatred. He also shed light on the details of his own trial. To recap, Kuramshin was accused of extortion, but the jury acquitted him, after which the judge charged him with usurpation of power and sentenced him to 1 year in prison. Since the activist spent the major part of his sentence in jail, it was decided to release him in the courtroom. More details in the next report.
Finally, I'm coming back home with my son. I thought I wouldn't live to enjoy this moment. The mother of human rights activist Vadim Kuramshin has been renting an apartment in Taraz for 3 months, waiting for the verdict to be passed on her son. She's now packing her things to go back home, while Vadim is cooking his first breakfast in the kitchen after spending 7 months in jail. Before going back home, they'll pay one more visit to the pretrial detention center, where the well-known human rights activist was held since January last year. Vadim, are you still there? The librarian brought us some books from the library so we could read. Kuramshin came back to the pretrial detention center to collect his clothes, since it's a bad sign to leave them there. He remembers the 7 months he was under constant surveillance here, isolated from everyone. The cell was guarded 24/7. Vadim could only pass his open letters about the failing political system by reading them aloud to other inmates through the ventilation shaft. Even when the entire jury ruled that Kuramshin was not guilty of extortion, he was still charged with usurpation of power and sentenced to a year of custodial restraint. After that, the human rights activist completely lost faith in the transparency of the court system.
Верить в нашу систему правосудия может быть только человек, может быть, страдающий олигофренией.
Only a mentally challenged person would trust our court system. I did not change my opinion. I was acquitted by the jury, but the pressure I've been put through is too harsh to talk about on camera. It's obvious as it is. It was the jury that put an end to the row between Vadim Kuramshin and Mukhtar Udrbaev, an official from Kordai prosecution office, with the trial lasting through the entire summer. However, one of the jurors said off camera that the team was subjected to pressure, receiving phone calls at workplaces with instructions on the verdict. On May 28th, Judge Samat Odisbayev ruled that the trial was to be held without the presence of the jury. As a result, jurors missed many witness testimonies and an appeal to annul the results of the philological and physiological probes. Of course, according to the law, no one has the right to remove the jury from the courtroom.
Насколько тяжело им дался этот вердикт. И что побудило этих двоих все-таки не...
I don't know how hard it was for them to pass that verdict and what made 2 jurors vote against me when 10 voted in my favor. I could see that the 2 were against me from the start, but I don't know why. In the long run, common sense did prevail.
И почему они были против, это тоже же понятно. Ну, как бы за меня были не присяжные, за меня был здравый смысл.
Kuramshin's attorney demanded to dismiss prosecutor Rahmetullah Akhmetov since a video on the internet showed him having a friendly chat with Mukhtar Udrbaev, the victim in the case, just a few minutes before the trial. The motion was rejected. They came to me and we greeted each other since I know them. We sat down and chatted about ordinary things. According to Kuramshin, his lawyers did the impossible when they managed to destroy the framed case in a country where the court system does not normally follow the supremacy of law. The human rights activist received a 1 year of suspended sentence and was released right in the courtroom. But even while in his cell, Vadim kept an eye on the fate of Vladimir Kozlov. Seeing the way that process goes, the human rights activist is not very optimistic, even though there are no actual elements of the crime.
Но я надеюсь, что все-таки в ближайшие по истечению 3-5 лет ситуация несколько изменится.
Kozlov is definitely going to prison, but I believe that in 3 to 5 years the situation will get better and he will be released. This isn't a criminal case because he did not commit any crime. I hope that in the next 5 years our political system will undergo dramatic changes and democratic process will start paving its way. With this in mind, I hope that the situation with Vladimir Kozlov will change for the better. The human rights activist says that there will be no ease for Vladimir Kozlov. Too many people are involved in the case of the opposition party leader. Kuramshin knows why all the former activists of the oil workers' strike movement and party fellows suddenly turned against Kozlov.
Первое, что я услышал из уст следователя, когда он явился ко мне в следственный изолятор, было предложение сдать Винявского.
The first thing investigating officers proposed to me in the pretrial detention center was to testify against Vinyavsky. I am convinced that testimonies of people currently speaking against Kozlov are not even actually required, however illogical that may sound. They were just given papers to sign, and that's it. After his release, Vadim Kuramshin intends to carry on his human rights work. As before, he is planning to provide legal assistance to people convicted on false charges, especially since Kuramshin now has first-hand experience of Kazakhstan's legal and prison systems.
The data from the survey on the work of the judicial system was published this week in Kazakhstan. Its findings were quite disappointing. More than half of the country's population were skeptical of the judges' activities. To find out why, we turn to our next story.
According to the results of a public poll published by Transparency Kazakhstan, half of the country's population does not believe that the local judicial system is trustworthy. The respondents indicated that corruption, red tape, and the dependency of judges on the executive branch were the main issues of the judicial system in Kazakhstan. 55% of respondents believe that the judicial system deserves a C for its work, while only 24% find it excellent and good. 45% of those polled described courts as fair and impartial, with 53% believing they cannot count on the court's objectivity. Nurmuhammed Leombetov has been looking for justice for 4 years. In 2008, his wife was hit by a car while crossing a road. Doctors saved her life, but the woman was left disabled. A criminal case was instigated against the driver only after the desperate husband addressed a complaint to the president of the country during a live telecast. However, the driver managed to escape punishment even after that. Nurmuhammed Leombetov even brought his case to the court in a civil process, but once again failed to hear the just verdict. During a hearing at the Supreme Court, the judge said that my wife was crossing the road in the wrong place. I pointed out that he should read the case files first, since my wife used a pedestrian crossing. The judge removed me from the courtroom and examined the case for 40 minutes since everything was in Kazakh. When the process resumed, the judge said that I have all legal rights to lodge an appeal in the Supreme Court. Human rights activist Marat Bashimov believes that the hiring policy is to blame. Not only judges are appointed and dismissed by the order of the head of state, oftentimes not the most qualified specialists end up in high positions. Moreover, the work of judges is often affected by orders from the authorities. Pressure coming from the top does not add objectivity to their rulings. If the judge was appointed thanks to his ties and bribes, we cannot expect him to be impartial. I believe only fair, honest, and respectable people should be part of the judicial system. Even former Supreme Court judge and current member of the Constitutional Council, Anarja Elganova, admits that the judicial system in Kazakhstan needs further reforms. The lawyer assumes that some judges interpret the laws in their own interest by using loopholes in the legislation.
Чистоплотные судьи, которые действительно дают повод нашим гражданам говорить о том, что наши суды не объективны.
Corrupt judges are the reason why our citizens complain about an unjust judicial system. These judges are the ones who create red tape and apply wrong articles for the cases. Of course, I cannot claim that all constitutional provisions are enforced.
На сегодняшний день исполняются и выполняются? Конечно, нет.
Judges are not surprised by total distrust. Public figures and even the ruling party have been calling for a greater public scrutiny of their work for a long time. But in practice, when it comes to trials with political components, as in the case of Zhanauzian tragedy, or scandals involving judges, for instance, the case of 6 Supreme Court judges, the judicial system is closed to public scrutiny. In this situation, it is not surprising that the distrust to judicial rulings and judges is only getting stronger.
The holiday was not as lush as it used to be in the city of Aturao. There were no concerts or folk festivals, while the main event that was set to begin in the morning in the Isatai and Makhambet Square was postponed for unknown reasons.
The local administration said that main festivities will start in the evening, allowing residents of Aturao to enjoy fireworks, among other things. Nevertheless, people are not upset about postponed celebrations and prefer not to link the current circumstances of the Constitution Day celebration with a sensational dismissal and changes within the region's administration, although the topic remains on everyone's minds. We are celebrating the Constitution Day. Despite dismissal of senior officials, the city is generally in a good mood. It goes without saying that the ex-governor Bergir Iskaliyev did a lot of things for Aturao region. He built new roads, kindergartens, and made the city more attractive. When administration heads leave their posts, people normally accuse them of embezzlement, messing things up, and this is all widely discussed in the media. But our former administrator should definitely be given credit for his work. I was very surprised when I read about it, as I always had a good opinion of him. He did a lot for the city. Of course, he's guilty, but I think he's just a pawn in a big political game. He might have stolen something, but we don't know for sure. He did a lot for the city, built bridges and new roads. However, ex-heads of administration never left clean. I think they might all be accused of embezzlement.
Constitution Day is celebrated all across Kazakhstan's regions. The 17th anniversary of its adoption was greeted with a day off from work and concerts in central squares. The value of rights and freedoms were also recalled in the city of Almaty.
August 30th went by as a typical holiday in Almaty. The usual music stage was set up outside the Palace of Kazakhstan, and Mayor Ahmedjan Yesimov opened the celebration with a speech closely resembling the one he gave last year. The Constitution is a secure foundation of an independent state. It identifies the priorities of internal and foreign policies. It laid the foundations for the value objectives, including the love of country, civic duty, tolerance, and unity. Life goes in accordance with the Constitution, say the officials. They don't believe that fundamental rights and freedoms provided in the document could be violated. In turn, Almaty dissenters think otherwise, as they've been arrested several times outside the Palace of the Republic. The government and dissidents have different views on the freedom of peaceful assembly, guaranteed by the Constitution. In response to that argument, officials refer people to courts. If you disagree or believe that your constitutional rights have been violated, you're entitled to take the matter to court. In the midst of the work week, city residents are enjoying the chance to relax and resolve accumulated issues. Most of them don't look closely into the history of constitutional amendments, which already happened 3 times. Those who do remember that believe that even amendments cannot reduce the importance of the main document. We just need to ensure that these rights are observed so that no one will be violating them. We are the people carrying a lot of Soviet baggage, so I believe our rights were not violated. The Constitution is the fundamental law, and that is why we've gathered here to celebrate. Most recent amendments to the Constitution were introduced in 2011, allowing Nursultan Nazarbayev the authority to call for early presidential elections. On Thursday, the president announced that even more amendments will be introduced to the Constitution in the future.
A Kazakh designer offers to diversify life through creative apparel. All you need is a boundless imagination and a simple t-shirt. Vsevolod Demidov demonstrated how a masterpiece can come out of such simplicity at his masterclass in Almaty. According to him, even ordinary household bleach can perform miracles.
The designer was born in the Soviet Union. When he was a child, Demidov already stood out among his peers by constantly having his t-shirts tainted. The techniques got better with time, and today his unusual prints are appealing to the young adults. To prevent the art from disappearing, it was made available to the public. It is in my nature to experiment with things, and I love using non-artistic materials. When I see casual things like a whitener, for instance, I think of how it might be used for my artistic purposes. I used a bleacher to draw pictures on colored paper, then took a brush and painted with it, wanting to see how it would look on a piece of cloth.
This is all we have time for now. Thank you for watching. Stay well.